So first of all, thank you, Tamás and Hetal, for joining us today and being interested in speaking in our user group. We're very happy to have you. We will start by Tamás first with headless implementation using Next.js, and our second session will be by Hetal, and she will be speaking about Content Hub CMP data modeling. So Tamás, you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start then. I will share my screen. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So today in this session, I will talk about Sitecore Headless experiences which we had, and I will share the story of our first Sitecore Headless project with Next.js, and this was our first Sitecore Headless project at all. So I think it will be also useful for anyone who is who's not using Next.js, but maybe some other technology on the front end or on the head. So yeah, let me just just a short introduction about me. I'm Tamás from Hungary, Budapest, and I am a 6th-time Sitecore MVP. And yeah, you can find my blog on the address. I can't really spell it, but basically it's my name without some letters, and the same name for Twitter. So let's have a look at the agenda first. In the first 3 points, this is basically the first half of the presentation. I will talk about what is the differences between headless and traditional CMS architecture. That's just a really short one, just to catch up. And then we will have a look at the backend side, so the Sitecore Headless services on the Sitecore side. And then I will talk about the front end a bit, what Sitecore Next.js SDK is providing for us, and what kind of main components we have there to use. And in the last point, this will be basically the second part of the presentation, is the full story of our first Sitecore Headless project. If you have any questions, I'm fine to interrupt me, or you can also just write the questions at the end or discuss at the end if that's more suitable for you. So let's start. First, have a look at the headless CMS architecture. Let's compare with the traditional one. So on the left side, you can see the traditional CMS architecture, where basically to show something on the front end, you also have to run some kind of CMS, because usually the CMS features are built in the SDK, which are doing actually real database connections. So here we have basically a direct connection from our application to the CMS database, even though if it's the front end or the authoring interface. And then we can serve this data, basically this HTML, which we render on the server side usually, then that goes to different devices. And compared to the headless CMS, the big difference is that we don't have a direct connection to the database from the front end, but we have an API layer in between. So it's connecting and getting the data from the database through an API. And the front-end code doesn't really need to be any CMS related, so you can actually reach the API without any SDK. I mean, you can also do this with the database, but you have to know the database structure and everything to get data in a good and easy way. So for that, we have the API, which basically then converting all the database data to JSON responses, and then that JSON response can be processed by any kind of front end, which can have an internet connection to that API. So that's the big difference, and I think traditional CMS still has a place, and in some cases it's still a good choice. Basically, headless CMS is really depending on your, I think, in my opinion, it's really depending on your developer skills and development team. So are they, experienced with ASP.NET or MVC and plain CSS and JavaScript, or this is more like or you have more like a front-end team who knows the new front-end technologies but doesn't know Sitecore. So I think both choices could be good. So this was a really short one. That's all I wanted to say about the comparison between the two kind of architecture. And now let's talk about the Sitecore Headless services, basically the backend side. The most important part for us on the project was the layout service, and the layout service is actually the API which is providing the content for a page in a JSON format. And of course, JSON response is better for programming languages to process than HTML, and basically this can be processed by any kind of programming language. And I brought an example of a layout service response, so we can have a look on the different parts of the response. First of all, we have a root node called Sitecore, and under the root we have the context. This is not really page-related content. It's more like you can imagine on the backend like the Sitecore.context, where you can get some information about the actual request. So, for example, the first one, page editing, is false or true, depending on the on this flag. The front end will behave differently, and here we can see some other information. For example, I guess this request was made on the content management server, so that's why we have the user info here as well, because in this case, when we access the API from the content management server after a login, then the user will be our own user. If you already used headless services, you always have to create a user, or you use a GSS user or a headless user to bind actually to the API key. So you can have, when a request is coming not from the content management server but from the content delivery server, so from the NEXJS server, then the user data will be always this, let's call it service user, where you can also give different rights for the user. But it's really important in case of a NEXJS application, or in case of a headless application, by default, it doesn't provide any user information, because the user is basically not existing in Sitecore for the NEXJS request. So here we have more like a service-to-service connection. I will show that there is an architecture diagram as well about that. So, and yeah, there are some other informations, and then the next big part is the root. The root, maybe a better translation for us is a page. So here we can see all of the related information about our page, or the context page, which we are trying to access. And here we would see all the fields on the page item. It's really simple now. I have just one field called page title, and I can also see some other basic information which can be used on the front end. The next big part, which is the most interesting one for our NEXJS application, is the placeholders. Inside the placeholders, actually, we can see the presentation details of a page item. And here we can see JSS main is a placeholder. This is our root placeholder. And inside that, I have a layout, which is in terms of Sitecore, it's actually a rendering. But in terms of NEXJS, it's actually the main layout which we are using. It's just the container around the all of the other components. And inside that, I can also have placeholders. Here I have the JSS header here, and here I have the JSS content. And inside the JSS header, it's an array, so I can have multiple components, but I have just one header here and all the fields. And the same for the JSS content. I have just a simple text component here. It's really important that for different field types, the JSON will differ. So, for example, the logo is an actual image, and this serialization is all done by Sitecore. So the value will contain all the information which we gave on the content management server. So in case of an image, it will contain an object like this. But in case of, for example, a text is just a simple string here. And in case of a link, it's really similar like the image. So let's go to the next part, is about the content resolvers. So when we are talking about the layout service, it's a really key point of having the content resolvers. So this is actually responsible for the content of rendering component. If we are talking about the traditional way, this is something like a controller in the MVC world. And the view is actually the NEXJS, is on the NEXJS side. So here we have some built-in content resolvers provided by Sitecore. For example, maybe the most used one is the data source resolver and the context item resolver. You can define these, so which resolver should be used. You can define this on the rendering item inside Sitecore. So if I go back to this screen, for example, I can see the header here, and to resolve the fields or the actual content of the component, we can use, in this case, for example, the data source resolver. And then Sitecore will automatically convert all the content to a JSON if we set it to the data source resolver and if a data source is set for the actual component. And the same applies for the context item and so on. I heard some notification. Was there a question? I just don't see. Okay.
Yeah, I have a quick one. So we've seen the data source controller, we've seen like an item resolver, right? And there's for children. What if, like I have a carousel, I have the slides as children, but I still have some features on the parent level. Is there a way to use something that renders everything together? Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I wanted to just say that you can also write your own custom resolvers.
Okay.
So it's really easy. It's we just have to inherit from a specific iContent resolver interface, I believe, and then basically we have to implement one method, which is returning back, if I remember correctly, a J object from the Newtonsoft NuGet package, and then that gets resolved inside the component.
Or
But
whatever format you are expecting.
yeah.
Okay.
And there is also, I didn't put it in this slide, but there is, I think it's called the chained content resolvers. So, sorry, I don't remember the author.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
But basically, you can chain different resolvers into one. So let's say I want the context item resolver and also the data source resolver in one. You can chain it together, and then it will resolve the context item and the data source item as well. It's on GitHub, I believe. I will check that because I know it's there somewhere. Okay. Yeah, so this is the methods we have been using as well. So on the back end, actually, as I was mostly the Sitecore developer on the project, and I had to just write a few content resolvers, not much. So I think I wrote maybe 2. And on all of the renderings, we could use data source or context item resolvers. And but there is another way to actually get content from Sitecore, but we were not brave enough to try that out. It's actually the GraphQL. So Sitecore has a feature that you can write queries in GraphQL on the front end or on the Sitecore side, and then you don't have to implement content resolvers, but you can actually resolve the content with the GraphQL query. I don't dive into that much, but it's really good to know because especially when we are talking about XM Cloud, there we only have the GraphQL Edge endpoint, and there we need to write the GraphQL queries to get the content from Sitecore. Oh, I just heard another question coming in.
Sorry, Tamás, but I have a quick question. Is there any preferences regarding if we use graph or use the resolver?
Yeah. Yes. So I would say try to use the GraphQL when you are confident enough and you know that the data won't be that much and the queries wouldn't be that complicated. But maybe if you want to have some business logic on the backend side, maybe content resolvers is a better option, at least in my opinion, because we have more control over how to get data and how to resolve basically the content. Yeah, and if you have some kind of problems or performance issues, we can dive into the content resolvers. But yeah, if you are planning to move to XM Cloud, definitely GraphQL. If you are not planning to move to XM Cloud, then I would say investigate both of the options in the beginning of the project. So, for example, if it's really simple, like having text components and basically static data from the site or from the content management server, then I would say GraphQL. But if you need business logic, maybe content resolvers is a better way.
Thank you.
We are just also experiencing this on my current projects. I think this is the 3rd headless project where we have really, so the authoring experience doesn't need to be that good, but it's more like a database kind of architecture which we have on the content management server. So for example, they don't use Experience Editor that much because they don't care about how it looks like. For them, it's more important to easily find data in the content tree and then modify it. And there we have a lot of business logic in the content resolvers to respond to the Next.js application with the reduced content and the content with the content which the actual Next.js application only needs. Okay, so let's move to the next one, which is the infrastructure. So this is how the infrastructure would look like if we are talking about a traditional content management server, where we have, it's a simplified version, but so we have content management servers, or one content management server, and we could have multiple Sitecore content delivery servers. And with Next.js, we still need the content delivery servers, because the JSON is also so the JSON response and the layout service should still respond to the Next.js application. So it would have the same kind of load on the content delivery servers, but it's forwarded and it's not rendering the actual HTML, but the JSON, of course. And the Next.js applications, you can see here two. One is called NEXJS CM, and the other one is CD. So here we have a specific Next.js application which is only connected to the Sitecore content management server. The reason for that is we have, or you could have actually different kind of features on the content management server, also of the Next.js application, where you want to, I don't know, disable authentication, for example. So for example, if you have an application on the content delivery side of the Next.js, where for any kind of action, the user has to be logged in, then that could be bypassed in the CM instance, but we should, of course, enable on the content delivery instance. But you could also do the other way. So you could also have just one Next.js application which is connected to the CM and the content delivery server. That also works. It's just, it's, in my opinion, it's a more cleaner architecture if we have separated applications. I will show the infrastructure of our project at the end. We can dive into that. Yes, I forgot to press the space. So what we have in the Sitecore Next.js SDK. So now we are talking about the front end, the head of the headless CMS. So Next.js is a React framework for production. This is stated by Versa. And I want to here emphasize what kind of rendering methods it's supported, because I think this is one of the key points. Next.js is a really good choice. So the first one is the server-side rendering. Okay, it's nothing special. It's like or similar like the ASP.NET MVC applications, or the HTML is rendered on the server side on request time. The next one is the static site generation. The difference is here that the site is actually built up. So all the HTML is generated on the build time. So this is not really useful for us, because with Sitecore, you don't want to rebuild the whole site HTML just because you published a page. And then the third one is the client-side rendering. It's when on request time, the actual HTML is put together on the client side. And then the last one is related to the static site generation a bit. It's called incremental static site generation. This means you can regenerate the static HTML in runtime, for example, if I publish a page, then I can just regenerate the actual HTML of for that page, and I don't have to regenerate the whole site again. So these are the main rendering methods which are supported by NEXJS. And I want to say here that on the server side, rendering is not fully true that it's all happening on the server side, because on the first request, it's definitely on the server side. So when you, for example, hit the home page of the NEXJS application and you use server-side rendering, then everything is rendered on the server side. But if from the home page, if you use a specific Next component for links, for example, if I click on a link on the home page, then it's all generated on the client side then. So there is not it's called hydration by NEXJS. So it's basically hydrating the site, and then it's only getting in the JSON format the data and then rendering it on the client side, the HTML. Okay, let's have a short look what kind of features we have in the NEXJS SDK. So we really need to think about it as a head and a front-end application, which is basically connected to an API to get the data for a page. And for that, what we need to do is first we have a component factory. So component factory is basically a list of components which we want to resolve dynamically on the page. So if let me go back for the JSON. So for example, here in the component factory, I need to define the header and the text. And then the component factory take care to resolve these components on the Next.js side. So it's really similar like we have it in the MVC world. We are building components and not pages, and then the components are used by the editors, and then after publish these, or not just after publish, but these components are then resolved on the front end. So we have the list of components, and then the next one is the placeholder resolver. It's I don't think I need to tell too much about it. It's resolving the placeholders inside the components. The next one is the field helper component. For example, if I want to render a link from Sitecore, I don't need to go through all the properties and put it in the correct tag in the HTML element, but Sitecore SDK is providing this kind of helpers for us, or Sitecore components, and then we can just use them and parameterize. So for example, if I want to use a link, I just need to open a link field or open a link component and then pass the field which I want to render as a link. The next one is the logic of fetching and mapping the layout service response. So basically, this component is about making the connection to our Sitecore content delivery server and then get the data and then map it to TypeScript objects. It's by default supporting multi-language. What is important here, when we set up a new language, we need to set up in two places. So once we have to set up in Sitecore to add in the content tree a new language to the site or to the Sitecore instance, and then to use it on the Next.js side, we also have to configure it in the Next.js configuration. And yeah, I don't know how to spell it. So this I18M is actually the internationalization of, it's a hard word, of the It's actually an NPM package which is doing it automatically. And we also have Sitecore Analytics and Experience Editor support. It's really important to support Experience Editor. You need to use the field helpers from Sitecore. If you're using React components or pure React components or pure HTML, then that component is not inline editable, or that actual field is not editable inline in Experience Editor. So to make it editable inline, you have to use, for example, a text component from the Sitecore SDK, because in case of an Experience Editor usage, then the NEXJS application is rendering out some extra HTML for the Experience Editor to make it inline editable. And the last one, but probably one of the most important one, actually it was really important for us, is the disconnected mode. Basically, it enables the NEXJS developers to work in offline mode, so they don't have to connect to any kind of Sitecore. They can work with their own mocks, and in the mocks they can actually describe a page like really similar way like in this JSON, but it's in a more simpler way. They don't have to define, of course, the UID and things like that, but they can just define, for example, the fields and the values of the fields. And this is really useful because this enables the front-end developers to work on their own, and they don't have to wait for the Sitecore developer, I don't know, to add the new text field, which will be available through the API by the next deployment. They can just add on their own and then to the mock files and then use it. And then later, when we deploy to an environment where we already have the connected mode, so not disconnected, then it should work on the same way. So it's important to say that if you are working with disconnected mode, you don't have to change any code to work in connected mode if the mocks and the Sitecore is in sync. Okay. So the last piece of this presentation is the story of our first Sitecore Headless project. Let's just a short introduction about the project and about the requirements. So the timeline was pretty short, I would say. It was we had to finish it in 7-8 months. I mean, from the first meeting with the client to go to production with all the security tests and everything. So it was pretty tight. And they already had an existing Sitecore MVC site, which was good. Because we could use the same instance, we just have to create another headless site, and the two sites can actually work together. So, or next to each other, they didn't have any effect on each other. So this is good because we didn't have to really worry about installing Sitecore, building up the infrastructure for Sitecore and everything. We could just use the existing one, and we just had to add our own new infrastructure components like the NEXJS application, which could work with the existing content delivery and content management servers. And the client was pretty technical, so they already had their own solution architects and some other technical stakeholders who actually chose the headless technology, and they found us to do the implementation for that. And let's talk about the domain a bit. it was actually a booking system. So after a login, users could book different activities in different basically hotels and parks. So it was a big kind of holiday company, and we had to do this booking system to be able to book activities. And from this point, we could see that it's not like a traditional CMS implementation, because in CMS implementations, usually what you have is basically static data, which always the same on the page, or most of the time they are not changing too much, or they don't have dynamic data. But in this case, I mean, if it's a booking system, it's always showing, or it has to show dynamic content and fresh data. And for that, we choose to use the Sitecore side, sorry, not Sitecore side, server side rendering, and yeah, the Sitecore Headless with content resolvers. And other important information is that we had to do a lot of integrations on the NEXJS side. So basically, the NEXJS application was connected to Sitecore and a bunch of other applications. So it was connected to a booking system, a payment system, and so on. And of course, to get product information, because product information was not stored in Sitecore. In Sitecore, we were just storing, let's say, marketing content or translations for static content. So this is what we had in the beginning, and we had to set up a team. And as this was our first Sitecore project, Sitecore Headless project, we wanted to have the most experienced people on the project in each stack. So it was really good because we had available senior front-end developer for the project, and he had already React experience, not much Next.js, but he heard of it. But he was not using Sitecore at all in previous project. So, and we also had a senior Node.js developer. It's not needed for all the projects, but in this project, he was doing most of the API calls and wrappers to the other services rather than Sitecore. So to the booking system and product information and so on. We had 2 senior Sitecore developers, and we had a tech lead. So our team was, I mean, the technical team was pretty small, but what is important is to have someone who knows their stuff really well, because we had to trust each other. So and also teach each other. So we had to have really good communication between the teams, because, for example, the front-end developer was not aware of the Sitecore, therefore he wasn't knowing the Next.js SDK from Sitecore. So first we had to do some kind of short training to just tell to the front-end developer what is the layout, what are the placeholders, what are the components, what are the fields, what kind of fields we can have in Sitecore. And after basically a short call, he had a clue of how a page is built in Sitecore. And yeah, from this point, it was easy to go on, because we had our own kind of dictionary, and we know, in terms we know what means what exactly. So let's focus on the. So we had a team, and now we start the project, and we started with discovery in the first few weeks. and the initial requirements were really about the business side. So about how the application should work, what should be shown on the home page, what should be shown on a product page, and so on. And everything was designed, and the design was pretty strict. So it turned out that the experience editor and to have granular components on the pages was not really important at the moment. And this was good for us because building smaller components is always a bit more time, and also there are more failures that the editors can do. And we decided to have pretty big components. So you can imagine, like, we had a header component on a, let's say we have a product details page. So we had a header, a footer, and inside that we had, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 components where we show the product images, description, price, and so on. But we didn't do atomic components. Yes. And yeah, so we also did the components in a way that it could be splitted to smaller components later points if you want. But for the MVP, we just wanted to get it done, and basically to get all the data from Sitecore to the front end, and then the front end do the stuff. So yeah, basically let's start with the 0 sprint. So if I go back, you could see that the Sitecore version was 10.1, and NEXJS is only supported from 10.2. So we had to do a Sitecore upgrade first. And it was easy. It was just a few, I think 2 weeks, because it was a minor version and or minor version upgrade, and the project, I mean the MVC project was pretty fine, and we didn't really need to fix too much stuff there. So the next step was to find out how to do the development, because if I go back to the team setup, yeah, we had basically 3 teams, and both is or all of them is actually depending on the others. Or no, sorry, this is not really true. Basically, the front end was depending from the Sitecore team and from the Node.js team because of the APIs. So until if we wouldn't have mocks and disconnected mode, the front end developer couldn't really write or implement actual components and API calls to the other services. So therefore, we decided to work with mocks everywhere where we can. So the front-end developer was using the disconnected mode from the Sitecore, and for the APIs, they just implemented API mocks on their side. Let's go back to this. So the communication was really important for us because we had to agree on contracts. So the contracts mean the response schema of different API responses. And in case of the Sitecore, we had to agree on which component has what kind of fields and how we should call them and what is the type of the field. So then we could build up together the YAML mocks with the front-end developers, and then after that they could work on their own. And after a while they had experience with the mocks, so basically then they started to create components in mocks, and then we manually imported those mocks into the Sitecore or those kind of contracts. And yeah, I already mentioned that we used server-side rendering. So in the first 6 sprint, what we were doing is working hard. We had two week sprints, so this is basically 12 weeks, and everyone was working on their own stuff, but nothing was really bound together yet. So the front end was working with mocks all the time. The backend was working, I mean, this is the Node.js backend, was working on the APIs, and we as Sitecore developers, we were working on mostly on component templates and component definitions and some custom code in Sitecore. But because of using mocks, at some point we had to bind the features together, and this was happening at the end of the 6th sprint. So basically, for 6th sprint, we didn't have, I mean, we had the application running, but everything was mocked on the front end. I mean, the data on the front end. So we could actually show to the client how it will look like and how the business logic works and how far we are with the development. But connecting the features together, or all these architecture components together, was happening at the end of the 6th sprint. And then QA was started to test, because until this point, the QA couldn't do any tests, because with mocks it doesn't make any sense to test. But for development it was really good. So once everything was connected, and the QA was coming in, and then we put it in UAT. So the QA was started to test the stuff, and of course we had a lot of bugs in this 2 sprint, and yeah, a lot of bugs we had to fix in this sprint. Mostly use cases which we couldn't test with the mock files, because we didn't do I don't know 10 version of a mock file just to cover all the use cases. Usually we had just one mock with static data, and if it was working, then we were happy. So when we actually started to connect, then real bugs were coming out. Yeah, this is my GIF, and it's describing our sprints. And as the last few slides, on the last sprint, we had the performance and penetration testing by external companies. And yeah, so here we had some performance problems, because the external APIs were pretty slow. So, for example, a login was taking like, I think, 15 seconds, because all the black box third-party systems was running so long. So what we did to optimize is basically cached everything what we can for a short period of time. So we cached basically all the third-party API calls for 5 minutes in a Redis cache, and then use the cache until it's expired. And on the first call again, we refilled the cache with the fresh data. And for that we used Node Redis, and it was easy to bind in and use this. So I recommend this package if you want to do something similar. A few words about infrastructure. So this was an existing infrastructure. The site was already running, and we just had to basically, so what they have on the right side here is we have the Kubernetes services, where we have, it's a really simplified one, but we have a content management and content delivery server, and the content management was connected to Content Hub to import some images. and the content delivery was, so we had two Next.js components here. One is a low traffic, so this is for the content management server, and this one is the app service for the high traffic for the content delivery server. And only for the content delivery, we used the Redis cache. And here, yeah, I don't show the full diagram, but here we had a lot of other third-party services which we used. And we also had Cloudflare here sitting in front of the applications. And yeah, basically this was the user. So it was not that complicated. We just had to add these new resources in Azure. And we used Azure because that was the client preference. So what we used for the first version is basically a Docker image running in an app service, and it was working pretty fine with a few thousands of visitors on each day. So here I just shared some learnings. So I think the implementation was fine at the end, and it was working great with the client. We went live in a very short time, and I think the main benefit is just really that everything could use their own stuff. So the front-end developer was able to use the React framework and the Next.js, which is really comfortable to develop applications for browsers. And yeah, I already talked about GraphQL, so I don't repeat myself. And again, the communication was pretty important, especially on the first project, to define some rules and how you should work together. And yes, the experience editor support was not easy for us because of the mandatory authentication for basically every page. And every page was showing data related to the actual logged-in user. So for supporting Experience Editor, what we did is basically we showed the mocked data from the third-party API in Experience Editor, which was not editable, but the Sitecore data was editable in Experience Editor. And we, of course, switched off the authentication forcing. And yeah, just a specific flow. I want to show how the Experience Editor is working together with the Next.js application, because this is a bit more complicated. Or actually, it's not complicated, but it's just good to know. So on the left side, we have the content management server, and on the right side, we have the Next.js app. And we have a timeline here from top to down. And so what happens when I open a page in Experience Editor? Then first it's posting a request to the Next.js application that, hey, I need this page in Experience Editor mode. And then the Next.js application is resolving the placeholders, resolving the components, and resolving the fields. And then it comes back with the page HTML with already rendered HTML for the Experience Editor to make it stuff or fields inline editable. So that is really important, that you should have a connection, or you have to enable the connection from the content management server to the Next.js app, and from the Next.js app to the content management server as well. I wanted to show this because usually we have restricted network on the content management part. So when you are adding a new component, like a new Docker image where we need connections, it's important to these two services should be able to connect to each other. And yes, so SUGJO Europe is coming. It's, I believe, starting in 10 days. Yeah, exactly, in 10 days or 11. So come to Malaga and learn a lot about also headless and some other stuff. Thank you for listening. That was my presentation. I hope you had something new to learn from it. Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Tamás.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone? Do you have any questions for Tamás?
I only have one. So when you did the implementation, was it already on 10.2? Like, did you have, because with GSS and headless layout, they did the separation between 10.1 and 10.2. So these are two different things.
Yes.
But you already started from 2. You did not have to do an upgrade for that.
Yeah, we had to do an upgrade first, and from 10.1 to 10.2. But that was a quick one actually. So it was like maybe 2 weeks just to do a full upgrade from.
But it was for the Sitecore, right? Not for the GSS part.
Yes, just for the Sitecore. Yes. So
okay.
the GSS part we started from scratch with 10.2.
Okay. You didn't have to do any upgrade. All right, fair
No.
enough.
Yeah. Yeah, because NEXJS wasn't supported in 10.1, so we had to do that, and we were happy that we could do that, and the client was happy to accept this solution.
Sounds good. That's it for me.
Okay. Anyone else? No. All right. Thank you so much, Tamás.
Thank you very much.
So guys, I think we can take 4 or 5 minutes break, and then we have Hetal going to present us CMP data modeling. So yeah, let's take 5 minutes break. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think everyone is back, hopefully. Hetal, welcome to our user group, and we're looking forward to your presentation. If you can share your screen so that we can make sure it's working as it should. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Hetal, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was talking on mute.
No worries. We can hear you now. You can start, Hetal. Go ahead.
And do you see my screen as well?
Not for me, not yet.
That's interesting. Let me see.
We can see you now, but not your
Okay,
screen.
let me share. Try and share again. How about now?
Yep, it's coming. Yep, you can see it.
Okay, cool. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm trying to make this one more of a like general understanding kind of session. So not, I probably wouldn't be going much into the technical, but it's sort of like a semi-technical chat. This is also based on my recent experience. I was recently tasked with CMP migration project. And because we come in with a Sitecore CMS mindset, there was a little shift in how I would think about different concepts on how data structure needs to be done. So that's how, and during that process, I had like a couple of aha moments that, oh, okay, I now I understand, because doesn't matter how much training you have gone through, until you actually work on a project, it doesn't become very much clear around what entails when you are working on a project for a given platform with a given tool. So with that, I kind of tried to answer some of the questions that I came up with, and I am just sharing what I learned in my process. Everyone is seeing the second slide? Just making sure that screen share is still on.
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. So the first thing that we would want to know in terms of when we are starting to work on a CMP project, like what's the difference? Because the first difference we would notice is the interface itself. The Content Hub CMP interface is completely different from Sitecore CMS's interface. So that's the first difference that we would see when we log in to the tool, which means that that also brings a difference between how we structure the architecture, or how do we architect the information architecture around different templates. I'm still kind of pointing out the Sitecore terminology, and I will show how that transitions into CMP terminology. So first, when we start looking at the tool itself, we think that, okay, how do I create Sitecore templates? So typically for any Sitecore CMS project, and I'm sure most of us have worked on a typical Sitecore CMS project. So we start by homepage, and then we have like sitemap and different sections of the website. And then maybe there are some forms that we have to design or implement. And we are given designs of these different pages. That this is how the home page is supposed to look like. This is the header, this is the footer, This is the secondary navigation, that kind of stuff. So the point is, when we start thinking about Sitecore CMS architecture, we start from presentation to breaking down presentation in the way we need the template. So we start with the page template, and then we think about how we are going to design data source templates, and what is the difference, like what are the items or fields that we can actually put on the context item, being the page item itself, and then breaking down based on what is presented, what is the component looks like on the website. We start breaking it down into different fields. That's typical CMS process of CMS architecture, that we start from the page design and drill it down to templates based on the page design. And then once we have sort of like all the pages of the site, like all the page designs available to us, we then kind of derive what are the reusable components, or that can become like data source templates. And we would have like separate folders inside under the global folder, where we would put all those data sources, or right under the context item, however we are designing, following the Helix principle and making sure that the content tree is structured correctly, and mostly mirroring how the site map looks like. So that's been our mindset for as long as I can remember. I started working with Sitecore in 2007, starting with Sitecore 5.3, and Sitecore has come a long way since then. But the way we architect our CMS components, pages, sort of like a content tree, hasn't changed much. Everybody in alignment so far? So far, so good? Awesome. So now, what's the difference when it comes to CMP, right? In CMP, first of all, there is no content tree. Content tree stays with Sitecore. And that kind of brings us to our second bullet point, where what CMP does is actually introducing a clear separation between data and presentation. So when you add CMP to the mix, what happens that Sitecore kind of becomes the presentation agent, or the presentation component of the full architecture of our platform. And CMP becomes the system of record, or system of truth, as I call it, where all the data lives with no regard for how it's going to be presented. And that separation allows us to use the different data types or content types that we have created in CMP across omnichannel. Because that's the first, that's the main purpose of having CMP, that you have, first, you have reusable data. And remember, I'm not saying content. I'm intentionally saying data, because I just want us all to understand that content becomes just some data that is populated across fields in CMP. CMP does not need nor worries about how that data is going to be used or presented. No worries at all. So that's the first purpose of CMP, that you have reusable data across omnichannel. And the second purpose is, with being able to reuse data across omnichannel, your brand actually starts getting a consistency. Your brand becomes better represented across omnichannels, because whether it's a brochure, whether it's an email campaign, whether it's your website, whether it's any print media that you are printing for some event or sending out in mails, the consistent images or content or the language allows the brand to be presented much stronger, rather than having different paragraphs of the same theme in an email campaign versus on your website versus in your brochure. So that's another big purpose that we use CMP. And there are a lot of other bells and whistles, but we won't go into that. Our main focus is so how we can make sure that the data that we are designing is effective and it's correct and it has only what it needs. So that's the very basic difference between how we structure data in Sitecore CMS and how we structure data in the CMP. And for example, header and footer. So if we start by if we think of doing some sort of, let's say we are doing some sort of migration project, or even it's a greenfield project that requires a CMP implementation, and we are all given page designs because sort of like the business process around how the project goes for a given website redesign or a new website is sort of going to be similar, but the way we interpret those designs is going to be different. So when we get the page designs or designs for different pages on the website, the first thing we are going to see is what is reusable. So there is a header, there is a footer, there is a secondary navigation, there is left navigation. Those are all dynamic components driven by the sitemap, which would imply the fact that it cannot be and will not be part of CMP. What I'm trying to say is don't overkill yourself with everything needs to be in CMP kind of mindset. It is very important to understand difference between truly presentation components that needs to be constructed dynamically from the content tree that will represent the sitemap. Hence, it becomes the presentation components and does not need to or must not live in CMP in any way. So components like header, footer, left navigation, those kind of components would still remain in Sitecore as they do today, or any CMS platform for that matter, but our prime focus is Sitecore. And the data that we are going to represent, now we are left with the middle, the body of the page, that's what we start breaking. So CMP and CMS is not going to give you one-to-one mapping that I have homepage and I have something for homepage in my CMP. Then I have this marketing page and there is going to be a marketing page in CMP. That is not the right way to use CMP, and that's not how you use CMP, in my opinion, based on what I have learned. So when it comes down to homepage or whether it's other pages, all pages cumulatively, you have to start identifying business entities and relations. So CMP's role kind of brings us back to the old SQL days or SQL data architecture days, where we were kind of going through a sort of like a normalization process, identifying what entity it is and what are the properties of this entity are, and how this entity is related to another entity if there is a relation. So bringing back those good old days, you would need to look at any websites that you are designing the information architecture from a different perspective. For example, let's say you are designing a website for a university. So university, of course, is going to have a homepage, but you are not designing for the homepage. You are designing for what is represented on the homepage. So that's the first question. What is that entity? And then on homepage, as we have seen typically, let's say feature courses or something feature that actually is derived from another entity that is not actually integral with the home page entity, because homepage itself is not an entity. Homepage of any website is basically the door for people to get in and start browsing your website. So don't mistake designing homepage as a data entity. You have to actually holistically look at the business that you are designing information architecture for. Understand that they're real life business entities, and design your CMP data types or CMP content types to represent those entities. So you will no longer be saying a two-column rendering, or even if it's for the data source component, it should not be like two-column image object or three-column video block. You have to understand what entity it represents. It's a video. So it's time CMP brings us to separating the three-column in CMS and the video block in CMP, or the content block in CMP. And then identifying what are the fields that you need to represent, or what are the fields that you need for this entity that can be reused across channel. And a typical example is in CMS when we are designing data source components. We have even seen at times that there is theme. So you are populating a data source component, and the data source component has a field like theme, and then the theme can be a dark theme or light theme or standard theme. And then for those three themes, you have some CSS classes associated with it, and you have created those three theme objects in your Sitecore content render in the global folder. So whenever somebody is setting up a data source component, they will be able to select the color scheme of how that data source component will be represented on the website. That is presentation, that is not data. So obviously, the selection that the content editor makes, selecting the dark, light, or standard theme, is not going to transition to CMP. That is presentation. So that remains with Sitecore CMS. But the fields that are on your data source component, like title, subtitle, heading, short heading, description, long description, short description, those are the type of fields that will transition to CMP. So it's very important to understand the difference between or clear separation between data and presentation, and design accordingly. And then also understand whenever you are designing a particular page, what business entity it represents. For example, let's say you are designing a B2B, you are designing content architecture or data modeling for B2B business or a corporate website, and they deal with different segments of the real life types. Like, oh, we deal with, for example, our company sends or sells products to schools, universities. So schools and universities are the real life entities. So you should not be designing for a school listing page or university listing page. You should be designing for school, university, and those would be identified as potential markets for that business. So that's the difference on how we think about CMS content structure versus how we think about CMP data architecture. So far, so good. Any questions? Anything I'm saying that's not making sense? Awesome.
Good, thank you.
Awesome, awesome. So once we have identified what business entities, what real life business entities these XYZ data structure that I'm coming up with is going to represent, then you start getting to data normalization process. Because one, going back again to our good old SQL Server data architecture days, you have identified all the business entities, you have identified all the relations between them, like if any entities are related. And again, when it comes to relations, also make sure that you are not conceiving two entities being related by the means of what page they are going to show up on, or what page they represent. It has to be the true relation. For example, XYZ, so university can be an entity. University would have its own properties at university level, and for each universities, there are different programs that those universities offer. Again, the program itself is now another entity, but that entity can have a relationship with university, or that entity can have relationship with many universities. So you have to understand, identify whether the relationship is one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, or many-to-many. I'm sure it sounds very familiar to all the engineers on the call. We have done this a million times when we were not designing for Sitecore CMS in our previous lives. But now those good old ways are coming back when you design for CMP. And I think that's what was most appealing to me, that it was true data design, data architecture that we get to do in CMP, exactly relating. Instead of calling it a university page, we actually call that entity or that content type, it's a university, it's a school, it's a cafeteria, and each one of them would have properties that can be used and reused across omni-channel with consistency, thus representing the business's brand very strongly across omni-channel. So that's how the technical side kind of gets strongly merged into the actual business. And that's the beauty of using CMP with Sitecore CMS. Now, so we have identified what the business entities are. We have done our data normalization. Use whichever tool you are comfortable with to identify those entities. Come up with an excellent an entity relationship diagram, and that will tell you what CMP content types you need to create. But before you do that, I want you to understand there is a difference between, and again, I might have come up with this sort of definitions for my better understanding. There is a business domain model, and then there is a content data model. What's the difference? So business domain model, in my mind, is something that sort of loosely represents the sitemap. So if I'm going to a university or a school page, a school can have various properties across that are applicable to all the schools. So I have to extract those properties, which I can use to add facets and filters, either on my website or even in CMP, which eventually will become taxonomy, and that would help me to do some content organization in CMP. Because remember, in CMP, you don't have like a folder structure like you have in Sitecore, that you can just create a template folder or a folder, or you can even create a special folder template and start organizing your content. Basically, the Windows Explorer kind of interface that we have in Sitecore CMS, we don't have that in CMP, which is a shift, but I think is a good thing. So identifying that level of taxonomy, for example, for a business that sells school supplies, right? And school supplies would be anything: furniture, it could be stationery, it could be games, toys, it could be anything. Because school supplies, think of Staples, the stationery store here in the United States, or any stationery store for that matter. That stationery store will be selling to university students, school students, kindergarten students, teachers. So think of all these segments as markets. That these are the markets. So when you are creating a content type when you are creating a content entity in CMP, you can have these special attributes that would help you kind of organize your content within CMP. So you can, at one time, you can simply work on a section of content that you want to be ready for to sync with omnichannel. So to me, that's the main purpose of having taxonomy, and that's sort of like a business or content domain model, identifying these organizational attributes that you can use for website search as well as in your CMP taxonomy. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Yes, it makes sense.
Cool. So now we get to design our CMP content types. And I think so far what I have talked about, we have understood what's the difference between CMS templates versus CMS content types. And remember, I'm going a very little technical here. When you are creating a CMS template that is potentially going to get its true data from CMP, you can still have additional fields, as I was saying before, that you need to set up a theme or you need to set up like a call to action, whether you are saying that, okay, for this component on this page, I want this button or this link to look like a link, or versus I want it to look like a button. Those all sorts of those presentation type of details can still be incorporated in terms of CMS fields. But by syncing, when you are configuring CMP connector, you can define which fields will be syncing from which content type to which CMS field. So CMP gives us this strength around our brand representations across omnichannel, while CMS can still facilitate our presentation needs. So when you are designing CMP content types, make sure you have identified your taxonomy based on your content domain model, created all those taxonomy items, and then get to create your CMP content types. Now, taxonomy can be added. A taxonomy can be added for all the content types you are creating, or a taxonomy can be added for just for specific content types. Depending how you need it, you can add it as a general member, or you can add it as a taxonomy in the item detail or content type detail section itself. So once you start creating your content types, you would have it is possible that you would end up with same fields, but I would still recommend to create separate content types. The main reason is the performance that we don't want to be compromised in Sitecore CMS side. Plus, it also gives us a sort of structure in terms of organizing our content in CMP by the means of taxonomy. So, for example, if you are creating universities, schools, cafeterias, kindergarten or daycares, that kind of entities, just create separate content types for them, even though they might end up with same fields. That's totally okay, because in CMP we don't have base templates. Base templates are gone with Sitecore CMS. So in Sitecore CMS, you can, the way we used to do in Sitecore CMS, we would identify these same fields appearing on all content types or content templates, and then just putting them in one template, and then using inheritance to create a specific template for university that inherits from base template. School inherits from that same base template. CMP does not have base templates, and I think it's a good thing. So CMP data architecture is sort of more horizontal than vertical. So you create all the content types, and the reason you would still want to create separate content types for each business entity that you have identified is so that you can create designated buckets in CMS. So when items will sync from CMP into CMS, all items will not end up in the same bucket, and that way you will not have to compromise CMS performance. So it's sort of like starting organization and proper structure from the bottom, which is CMP, and bringing it out to CMS so that you can enjoy the same benefits that you have in CMP in CMS, and have the same sort of content organization available to you. And then you can start using those entities that sync from CMP into CMS in your various context item, and thus you can keep your domain structure or your web domain structure separate from your CMP structure, and truly separate these two efficient and powerful systems to do exactly what they are meant to be doing. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one, Hetal.
Yes, Ishraq.
So I remember I've worked some time ago with a tourism organization, and we worked heavily on taxonomy. And we did like really implement, invest in content first approach, proper content strategy. We did the mapping for taxonomy. We mapped that to personalization and all of that. Now, what I'm trying to understand, because I've never worked with CMP before, so maybe it's my lack of understanding, but just trying to think, what's like, did you face any issues having your marketers or whoever going to be responsible for creating these, like literally just switch to another platform in order to create these things that's going to be synced back to Sitecore? And the second question, yeah, I can imagine, because just now trying to understand the separation between presentation and content, right? And that's the approach for headless CMSs. This is where when we think about content first strategy and your implementation, you would think is like, yeah, my team doesn't care much about how the page orchestration, right? You don't think about page design, but rather think about, for example, quick campaign landing page creation. So you like your entire core is built around like creating a content for campaign landing page. And here is like really understand your taxonomy and how that can relate to your page and all of that. So how did you see that switch? Because I know like it's just recently people started to make that station and make a little bit of understanding, but like it seems way too much systems in place.
Oh yes, very excellent and very important question. Thanks, Ishraq, for that question. So there is going to be some pain, and it's the pain that we call as like growing pain, because I have dealt with some content editors or marketers who are managing and maintaining content in Sitecore, who are very much accustomed and okay with doing a lot of inline HTML and CSS. With CMP, all that gets very limited. So someone or some content editors or marketers who are seasoned to do that kind of work are definitely going to have some trouble. But whenever I am in sessions with that kind of audience, I try to be as less technical as possible. Quite challenging considering my role as a technical architect, but I try to stay as non-technical as possible. And instead of telling them that these are the kind of things that you will not be doing in CMS, I try to say that you will start from here. Like, I'm completely eliminating the thought of CMS is out of the picture. I say, you come to CMP, you start putting your content together that you need to. Don't worry about how it's going to be presented. And then once it syncs with CMS, you can start building your page because the data source components that you needed for that page are already now in CMS. And then you can start building your page. But the main advantage is when you are starting or when you are designing your email campaigns, you will be able to use that same data source, the same content that you have put together, and you will not have to create something different for your email campaign or for your brochure. But considering the big shift in how they need to work, I'm not even mentioning the thinking about business entities and relations. I think that headache is for people like us. We deal with all that, so they don't have to. And we just provide them ample training and information of what they can do with CMP and how they can do it. And should they ever need to update any piece of content, how CMP is where they should start, as long as that piece of content was synced from CMP into CMS. But as much as we try, I think the support from the business stakeholders is also equally important. And like when I started working with CMP, it reminded me the theme that Sitecore had in, I think if I'm remembering correctly, in the symposium of 2019, I think the theme was bringing marketing and technology together. And I think CMP just does that because it forces us to create a solid data architecture for content editors and marketers. At the same time, also challenges us to convince and convey this new tool and how this new tool is going to be beneficial for the business overall to content editors and marketers, and also kind of bridges the gap between content creators, authors, and editors and marketing team. Because in CMP, you also have the ideation flow. So marketing team could be working on something and those ideas can be then flowed down to content editor, becomes sort of like a to-do item for the content editor, and they know what they need to create. And they start putting the content together and it syncs with CMS. So whenever I'm in session with business stakeholders and content authors, I don't focus on how the presentation is going to be separate from data. Those are all technical terms for people like us to understand, but I just tell them what they need to do and where. And then, of course, they will be like, oh, I was able to do that in CMS very easily. Why do I have to work in CMP? And I just jokingly say that's above my pay grade. Because there is a reason that the business has decided to purchase the tool, right? Yeah. So that ship is already sailed. Whether you like, I'm speaking for content editors and authors, like whether you like it or not, your business made that decision. So this is the tool you are going to use. My job is to help you as much as I can in this transition, because the transition is happening, that decision is made. Our job is to make that transition as smooth as possible, also making sure that they still have that level of comfort or sort of level of familiarity that they have with when they were creating data source components in CMS. And of course, they will be asking the questions like, oh, why can't I select theme? So without going into how theme is presentation and what you are doing in CMP is data, I simply answer, you will set that up in CMS when you are building the page. It's like omitting unnecessary or too much information, depending on the audience you are having the conversation with.
Yeah, I feel like this is Sitecore's attempt at the time to solve some of the issues that we used to have. Like, yeah, we do have seasoned content authors, but for the majority, when you have big brands, works globally, when you introduce multiple aspects of your content creation, not everyone is seasoned Sitecore, not everyone can work with the experienced editor, not everyone is quick enough to get onboarded and deal with all of that. And at the same time, I am always challenging and not giving those seasoned content authors the ability to do any inline HTML stuff. It's like, no, you can't do this.
Because I remember like how many times we had to deal with when a content editor mistakenly or accidentally put a wrong CSS class in inline style, and we had to troubleshoot, and it took like 3, 4, 5 hours. Now we don't have to worry about that because it's gone. Like CMP does have HTML field type, but it's very limited. You are supposed to use it in a very limited capacity. And then basically whatever you need to do in terms of presentation completely needs to be separated. Even if you want to assign a color, do it in the system of presentation. You don't need to do it in CMP. So for new people, or I would say for the newer generation of content editors and authors, CMP is going to keep things simple for them. That why am I not able to use inexperienced editor, or they just wouldn't have to deal with those challenges. Plus, I think it adds to the time available to us as well, because we won't be troubleshooting too many issues why things are not working in experienced editors, because this inline styling and all sorts of stuff gone away.
True.
It will provide the cleaner and I would say more behaving overall content across omnichannel. I'm not saying that all the challenges are gone. Users always manage. Even people like me and you, we always manage to break things. So that's not going anywhere. But I think it's a good effort. It provides a good separation as much as possible, making that transition easier for them. And I think that's what's our job. Because once we are doing a CMP project for an organization, they have already made the decision that they would like to use this tool. They have already seen the benefits. The opportunity and the challenge for us is to make them use or help them use this tool with utmost efficiency. I think that's our goal.
Agreed.
So that's all I had for today. Any more questions? I know this session was kind of abstract, but I thought the experience that I went through, I think it was very important to bring this thought process to the larger community, that especially when you start working on a CMP project, stop thinking about your data architecture as you would with Sitecore templates. It's different. There is a shift.
Yep, agree. Thank you so much, Hetal. Any questions for Hetal, guys? No?
I have lots of questions, but like nothing at this
Isha,
point.
feel free to reach out to me on Slack. Even if you want to set up a time for us to chat about, I am more than happy to help, because I think as much as we help one another, we end up learning more. So yeah. I'm always up for collaborating with anyone who needs help, or some sort of a soundboard, if not true help, like, I just want to talk about this. What do you think? And I'm always available for that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. I know, just thinking about everything Sitecore released in the past couple of years, right? Now we have lots and lots of options. We have multiple decisions that we make based on our business needs. So this is what I keep saying is, like, now, what's different from before, we're not driven behind the technology now. The business can adapt to whatever is out there. So
technology is taking a backseat.
Exactly. So it's interesting to learn more about this. So definitely I'll reach out.
Absolutely. Anytime. I have some more sharing to do, but I will do that sharing when I have actually some more aha moments with regards to how you manage things in DAM. So this year seems like is going to be my Content Hub year. So as I learn more, I will reach out back to Sitecore user group, Jordan, and we'll do some more sharing.
Thank you so much, Hetal. And thanks everyone for joining the group, and hopefully to see you next time. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.